Okay, welcome to another Sabbath School lesson. This is going to be over lesson number 10. We're looking at Jacob Israel. This is going to be basically the title. Jacob's name is changed over to Israel. So let's go ahead and dive into this one. This is kind of an interesting, um, actually, really interesting lesson. So the memory verse for this week is going to be taken from Genesis 32 and verse 28. It says, "And he said, Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." So what you see here is that Jacob's name is changed over to Israel, but the key here is he had a huge night of wrestling with God. So here are the main themes for this lesson. It's going to be Jacob wrestles with God, Jacob meets Esau, Dinah is violated, and you also have Rachel dies. Now, we're not going to be able to dive really into everything here, but a couple things just to hand out is we're going to spend most of our time in the wrestling between God and Jacob. But here's something to note that Rachel does die. That's also, so Jacob has two wives, Leah and Rachel dies early in childbirth. She ends up naming her son that she's dying with Ben-Onai, which basically means that she's naming it like son of my pain, which is not really good. She's identifying the son basically based out of the tragedy that's about to take place with her. She knows she's basically dying. But later, Jacob comes along, takes the child, and renames the child Benjamin, which means son of the right hand, which is a lot better. Basically, biblical names back in that time usually just didn't describe situations or events of where a person was born, but also their nature of who the child is going to be many times. And so, just a principle to pull out of there is be careful how you identify people around you. Sometimes we identify people in relation to our pain and not in relation to their potential or what God wants them to do. So don't identify people with your pain, identify them with their potential or where God wants them to be. Anyway, so that's mostly what we're going to do for that, but spend most of our time on Jacob wrestling with God. So here's the deal. So Jacob is out there, and it's the night before he's about to meet with his brother Esau. Esau is basically, again, coming after Jacob. He's going over to meet him because he heard he's coming back to Canaan, and he stole his birthright, remember, years ago. But basically, Jacob starts to take a night and go by himself by a water somewhere. And all of a sudden, a stranger takes a hold of him, and he starts to fight with the stranger pretty much all night long. And basically, the stranger takes their hand and actually puts it to Jacob's side, and Jacob's hip kind of lodges out. It dislocates. And so now he has a huge hip issue, super painful, but he keeps wrestling with the stranger. And eventually he kind of prevails. The stranger says, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." And basically he says, "No, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me." And that's really the key there. You have to pause and take a step back. What is Jacob's biggest concern at this moment in time? He knows that Esau is likely coming to kill him. And he's not as concerned about Esau killing him as he is about his relationship with God. So here's the big point. Jacob's biggest concern is his relationship with God, not what he will lose. His biggest concern is what his relationship with God is and not what he's about to lose. He's about to lose maybe his life, his wealth, his family, because Esau's coming. He's likely going to kill people. There's a lot that Jacob has to lose right now, but his focus is specifically not about Esau and what he's going to lose. His focus is all about what is God going to give him for a blessing. And that's one of the big parts about this lesson. What are you more concerned about right now? Are you concerned about situations in your life that you're likely about to lose something? Are you more concerned with the blessing that God is about to give you? Which one are you more concerned with? Now, number two, as we kind of move on in the story, and we'll come back to Jacob wrestling with God, but in brief, Dinah is also violated. Dinah is actually Leah's daughter. So Leah is Jacob's other wife, and particularly Dinah gets violated. There's a guy named Shechem who's a Canaanite who comes over, grabs Dinah because he sees her out somewhere and takes her in and he lies with her, which is a defilement in Israelite culture. And so because of this, everybody's upset. The brothers come out and they deceitfully make a deal with the Canaanites saying, okay, we'll give you our sister, Dinah, if you particularly get circumcised. And they all agree and say, okay, we'll get circumcised. The man that she's supposed to be given to truly loves her, but he made a huge mistake. And so they said, okay, no problem. And basically, they get circumcised. And on the third day, unfortunately, what ends up taking place, Simeon and Levi get a bunch of men together. That's a couple of the sons of Jacob. They get some men together, and then they go off with the sword and they slay the entire men in that area. So it becomes a huge massacre. They end up taking all the women captive, and Jacob is completely furious over the whole situation because now they've created a huge issue now in Canaan that maybe other Canaanites might come and attack them because of what they did. But here's the point of it, because they have a right to some degree for some frustration. Their sister just got violated. Her sister basically just got raped. So here's a big question to wonder about, and this is something the author particularly wants to bring out to you. What do you do when God leads you to a place where you're taken advantage of? What do you do when God leads you to a place where you're taken advantage of? Now, if you remember, God led them back to Canaan, and now they do what God says. They get to Canaan, and now all of a sudden Dinah gets raped. I mean, what do you do when you feel like you're trying to do the right things and someone still takes advantage of you, and it doesn't seem like there's any justice that happens because of it? This is something the brothers are struggling with, and you can kind of relate to them a little bit. What do you do when you're put in a situation when someone takes advantage of you like that? When bad things happen to good people? This is something the author really wants you to discuss and dive into there. Now, here's a profound meditation for you. So you remember when we were talking about Jacob wrestling with God and his name being changed, right? So there's a couple things to note about this, but there is a really significant point here, because there is a time of trouble coming at the end of the world. Something that we use as a reference and something the author references is going to be Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 5 through 7. You can read it when you get some time. But here's the big point here. What's interesting about Jacob's time of trouble in the Bible specifically, right, is you have to ask the question, why was Jacob in trouble, right? What happened to Jacob that he's actually in trouble? Well, he actually deceived his brother, right? It's not just that Jacob is so righteous and he's doing the will of God and tragedy hits him and Esau comes after him. Jacob actually did something wrong here. He deceived his brother. He practiced deceit a couple times, actually. And so he has a couple issues with his own person, and he's reconciled that over the years, but there are consequences still for his actions coming back to bite him over 20 years later. The point here is this. Sometimes at the end of the age, many times people get the idea that, well, you know what? The wicked people attack the righteous, and it's just because they're so righteous and they hate God. And there's some truth to that for sure. Except the problem is Jacob's time of trouble at the end of time, just like Jacob's time of trouble in the Bible, you have to link the two together. It's happening because of the own actions of Jacob. Jacob actually caused his own time of trouble because he went about deceiving and not doing things correctly. He ended up ticking off his brother and causing him trouble over 20 years later. This is why this situation pops off with Esau. So you have to remember this, that at the end of the age, it's not so much about, oh, I'm so good and people are attacking me, but perhaps there are some things that we're doing now that we shouldn't be doing that are going to come back to bite us later. And this is something to take into consideration, because the people and the saints at the end of the age aren't as concerned particularly about, you could say the people coming after them or dying. They're more concerned about their relationship with God, just like Jacob was. They're super concerned about their relationship with God. Why? Because there are many things that they actually did to put themselves in trouble, just like Jacob. There are many things that Jacob did to put himself specifically in trouble. So his main concern is justification with God and ensuring that he's cleared there. And God does save Jacob out of trouble, and God will save his people out of trouble at the end of the age. Remember, Jacob's name, particularly, I don't even know if I announced this at the beginning or not, but Jacob's names particularly means like deceiver. It's a person that overcomes by going around something or figuring out a way to get an edge over someone, right? But Israel, the name Israel, is to actually struggle through something, to overcome by struggling through something. So God changed the nature of how Jacob overcomes over time. That's why his name was changed. Jacob Now you're not going to overcome by getting an advantage over people or trying to get advantage over God. You're going to overcome by struggling with God and struggling with people. This is how you're going to overcome, Jacob. This is also how the saints at the end of the age are going to overcome. And this is how we also overcome today. I'm Oswald, and this is Profound Meditations Sabbath School Summary.